Hi, my name is Damon Brown. I'm damonbrown.net. My thing is helping people like you, people who are side hustlers, who are solopreneurs, who are what I call non-traditional entrepreneurs. I am like you. I've been on your journey. I sold my startup a few years ago, coming from a bootstrapping background as I was primary caretaker of my little kid. And so I get where you're coming from no matter where you might be struggling. My main thing is talking with you today about Oprah, and specifically how Oprah conquered her biggest failure. We look up to Oprah quite a bit. I know I have. I know literally tens of millions, probably hundreds of millions of people have. And it was interesting talking about this. I did a column in Inc. magazine about it. You can go to inkdamonbrown.com to read some of the more salient details. But I really loved writing this column, part of my regular column, just because it showed a side of vulnerability that we often don't see from people of that stature. So to give you some quick background, about 25 years ago now, I want to say 1997, was that 30 years? Jeez. Anyway, mid 90s, Oprah was Oprah with a capital O. She was at the top of her kingdom. She didn't quite start the OWN network, which she started about a decade later as far as an independent cable company, but she was, as far as TV, the maximum. I think she already became a billionaire at that period of time. So she was the stuff. If you grew up in my era, then you know what I'm talking about. Younger folks, you might not realize that, but she was even bigger than she is now, believe it or not. She's revered now because of this thing that she did in the past. And she did her first major movie that she produced, I believe, executive produced for sure, and it was called Beloved. And it was based on a Toni Morrison movie, and it was or book, and it was a really intense book. And the people had no idea how they're going to turn it into a movie. I think it starred Danny Glover and Kimberly Elise. I forget who the director was, Jonathan Demme. And so major folks, Jonathan Demme was really important at the period of time. And so like legendary stuff. Danny Glover, of course, was a legend in the different communities, and it flopped. Like the movie flopped. Like it flopped. Like, I think it probably was a $50 million movie, and they made like 2 million the first week, like something like that. And she talked about years later, she talked about how she went into a depression because it was the first time, perhaps in a long time, that she actually failed. And it's different when you fail at that scale. It's just different. I remember having my first major best-selling book. It was in 2010, and it was Damon Brown's Simple Guide to the iPad. I did not expect it to be a bestseller. I independently produced it. It rocketed to the number one on the Mac store. I immediately released another book later on that year, and I think literally my mother bought it. Like I sold like 3 copies to this day. It's been a long time. And so failure is even more intense after you have that much success. So she came down in perspective after years after it happened. She realized there were 3 big lessons that she ended up learning from it. First one is gratitude. The second one is service. And the third one is presence. And so I'm going to go ahead and break down what she means by these different things. So the first thing, and I'm going to quote her on this, is gratitude. That's when the gratitude practice became really strong for me because it's hard to remain sad if you're focused on what you have instead of what you don't have. What you have versus what you don't have. I talk about this in my upcoming book, Build From Now, How to Know Your Power, See Your Abundance, and Nourish the World, where the concept of build from now quite literally means build with whatever resources that you have. It's enough. You might hear my family in the background. I'm in my darkly lit, hopefully not too darkly lit office. We're actually still working through the pandemic. There's some light at the tunnel, but we're still working through it. My kids and my family have been sheltering in place for months now. Resources are thin as far as my things I talk about and build from now, as far as time and energy. And I'm still here with you. I still wrote a book. I'm still engaging with y'all. I'm doing one-on-one coaching with a lot of y'all. I still did this year. I did more keynotes than I ever done before, which is amazing considering it's a pandemic. And that's what the gratitude comes from, is saying, well, I can't travel to, I was planning on traveling actually to the Middle East, which I'd never been to before. I can't travel there, but I can connect with even more people because we're sheltering in place and now everybody's online. And so I have gratitude that I'm able to connect with you in this way through YouTube channel or Instagram or however you might be connecting with me. And so that's gratitude, because if you focus on what you don't have, then you start to get into trouble. But if you focus on what you do have, it's not a matter of being Pollyanna about it, but saying, I actually have these resources. You know, I have a roof over my head, and hopefully you do too. I have the ability to see and to write and to create. I have my full functions. I have a support network. I have a mouth, and I can put these words together. I can read. Really basic stuff that enables you to create and enables you to create the world that you want to see, which is really what Build From Now and the predecessor Bring Your Worth, which came out about 2 years before this, were really about. So that sense of gratitude ends up opening up way more doors than, I can't think of anyone who focused on what they lacked and then they end up finding more success. I don't know. Maybe you can shoot me an email over at damonbrown.net or comment, let me know when that happens. I've never seen that before, especially with the hundreds of people that I've coached and connected with. It's like, that's never happened. So anyway, gratitude is the attitude, right? Number 2, she talks about service. And let me quote her again. It taught me to never again, ever put all your hopes, expectations, eggs in the basket of box office. Remember, she's talking about the movie. Do the work as an offering, and then whatever happens, happens. I love this. In fact, it makes me emotional just because that's how I aim to serve you. So when I had my next independently produced bestseller, it was The Bite-Sized Entrepreneur, which is part of this now compilation called The Trilogy. But the very first book was super tiny, white little book. I think it's somewhere on the shelf. And it came out in August of 2016. My second son was just born. I was trying to figure things out after I sold my startup. I wasn't a journalist anymore because I've been a journalist for many years. But then I was an entrepreneur, but then I sold my startup, so I wasn't a founder anymore. It was just a confusing time. I talk about that in Build From Now, as well as a little bit in Ultimate Bite-Sized Entrepreneur. And so I wanted to release a book to talk about what it was like to be a non-traditional entrepreneur. Being African American, being a little bit older than the folks I knew when I lived in Silicon Valley, having a baby at home and then having a second baby on the way, bootstrapping, etc. Just all these things that didn't fit the Mark Zuckerbergs and the Steve Jobs, who were the prototypes at that time. And it became a bestseller, like a really big bestseller. And I was up there with the Simon Sinek's and the Chris Gillenbaughs, people I got to know or got to connect with later on. But at that time, they were very much my idols. And I was right up there with them on the top 10 on Amazon. And the thing is that I released that book with the intention of serving others and creating the book that I wish I had. There was no non-traditional entrepreneur book. None that I know of, and none that I ended up finding out about that came out at that time. Like, a few have come up recently, like Company of One by Paul Jarvis. Shout out to him. I appreciate his work. I mentioned it briefly in Built From Now. A handful of other books. The Power of Onlyness by Nilofer Merchant. I got to know her through TED. She's doing great work. Like, I can name them, but those books came out after The Bite-Sized Entrepreneur. Not saying that I started it and they did it. It was just their books weren't available at that time. I know they were working on their books for years. I just couldn't access them. I did that to serve. If my intention was to say, I'm going to be on the bestsellers list, then my book would have sucked. And that's worth a whole different discussion. I've done whole coaching sessions and keynotes about that, but your intention has to be pure. And by pure, it has to be from a place of service. Oprah, as she admits, got it twisted with that. She's like, I'm going to be number one on the box office, September of 1997 or whenever the movie came out. And she didn't. She fell into essentially a self-induced depression because her expectations were over here. Number one, those expectations, like, she had no control over that, like none. Just like as I'm recording this, Built From Now is coming out within a few weeks. You can go to damonbrown.net and actually get a special order if you're listening to it right now, and you get in on the pre-orders, which I would appreciate. You get a special gift that's pretty rare. But I can't predict if you're listening to me in the future. It might be on the bestseller list. It might not. It might sell 1 million copies. It might sell like a few. Some of you have already pre-ordered, so I know it's going to hit at least that minimum. Bring Your Worth is still selling, the original one. Bite-Sized Entrepreneur is still selling, the original one. Bring Your Worth, which came out 2 years ago, didn't hit the bestsellers list at all. But people discover it and they read it and they enjoy it, and it's a steady seller, what they call a perennial favorite. And people are discovering it, every week, every month, whatever, and they're contacting me. And I see the sales since I'm an independent publisher. But my place is to come out of service. We can talk much more about that, but I think she's so spot on with the idea of service. Because if you can always come from a place of service. And in my case, whether someone buys 1 million copies of one of the books or 10, did it serve the people that bought it? I can control that. I can't control the rest of it. So what she's really talking about is a lesson in control, which I love. Oprah, I think, has herself has said she's a control freak. I can relate to that on a different level, obviously. And if you have that intention of saying, I'm going to make this a bestseller, I'm going to make sure that everyone who buys this book loves it, I'm going to make sure that I become a millionaire based on this book. Those are a lot of things that you don't have in your control. But if you say, I'm going to serve people at the highest level, I'm going to show up as much as possible no matter what. I just hear my kids in the background. I'm going to show up at the highest level no matter what. I'm going to make sure that I'm there for the people that I serve when they need me. All those are tenets that I live by, that my career is based on, how I serve you. I can control that. If I control that, everything else is gravy. And if this becomes another bestseller or whatever, I just did my 4th TED Talk. I don't remember even thinking I was going to do one of them. I just did my 4th one. You go to damonbrown.net and check it out. It's based on Build From Now. But all I've been doing is serving. I didn't say I was going to do my 4th TED Talk. I just have been serving, and I've been called to serve. And it just happens to be on the TED stage. So, number 1, gratitude. Number 2, service. Number 3, presence. I talk to my kids and people that I coach and guide all the time. Here's what she says on presence. There's not a human being alive who doesn't want in any conversation, encounter, experience with another human being to feel like they matter. Who doesn't want to? Sorry, who doesn't want to? Let's try that again. There's not a human being alive who doesn't want in any conversation, encounter, experience with another human being to feel like that they matter. And you can resolve any issue if you could just get to what it is that they want. They want to be heard. And they want to know that what they said to you meant something. Most people go their entire lives and nobody ever really wants the answer to, how are you? Tell me about yourself. I take this one personally because it drives me nuts when people will ask casually, how are you? And I'll start to say something and then they'll just start talking. So to them, it's the equivalent of hi. It's perfunctory. They're not actually what they call active listening within the psychological world, right? And so what she's talking about is being fully present. I say this to my coaching clients. I say it's in a couple keynotes the whole time. My kids are screaming in the background. There's actually a nice cup of tea to soothe my throat that's waiting for me downstairs. I look forward to going to sleep. All that doesn't matter because I am present with you. You are the only people that matter right now. That's it. You can look me in the eyes and tell I'm telling the truth on this one. That's it. Everything else gets isolated out. It's not from a lack of love. It's more because of focus. Actually, a mentor told me about this. I love this idea. I talk about it in the Ultimate Bite-Sized Entrepreneur trilogy as far as having focus. And you can't be everything to everyone. You can try to be, I can be a mediocre dad and a mediocre speaker and appease both of y'all. But I'd rather be not available at this moment because my kids are good and be fully available to you. And once I hang up this video, then I'm fully available to my kids. So that sense of presence, which I think Oprah's gotten really good at, people can feel that. And so if you're going to, again, have gratitude, if you're going to serve, then you also need to be present because the other ones don't matter. And so I love these profound lessons. If you want to get more insights, you can check out my ink column at inkdamonbrown.com. I have 500 plus columns on there. They're all free. At least there are at this point. So go ahead and run through them. Have a good time. If you want to go deeper and learn more about your personal resources, then go to buildfromnowquiz.com. It's buildfromnowquiz.com. It's a free, simple quiz It's like 3 or 4 questions, and it'll tell you your biggest resources based on the book Build From Now: How to Know Your Power, See Your Abundance, and Nourish the World. And in the meantime, take care of yourself. Remember to always bring your worth, and that you can always build from now. Take care.